Well, this is the second time I've had the privilege of ministering over a weekend in this church. And I know the Lord is going to richly bless us as we look at a very important and critical issue that's facing our people today. Since I was here last, I have spent about 7 weeks in New Zealand and in Australia. I've been to other parts of the world too. I've been to the Netherlands and so on since I was here, and of course in many parts of this country and in Canada. But while I was home in Australia, I think perhaps more than at any other time before, it dawned on me that our people were in utter confusion as to what, as laity, they might be able to contribute to the reformation and the revival that God needs in His church today. There's always a feeling that I'm just a little nobody. What can I do? Who will take any notice of me? I see one or two of you here maybe shaking your head, feeling about the same way. And as I contemplated upon that and realized that most of our faithful laity were just in a state of uncertainty of how to respond, I believe that I had a responsibility to share in a somewhat extended series some of the issues that I feel might best help our laity today. By the way, I'm not here trying to split the laity and the ministry apart. I don't think that's what God would call us to do. What I'm talking about here is what also would be a great blessing to our ministry as well. Some people seem to think that there is a conspiracy by the ministry against the laity. That could be true, I suppose, in some circumstances. But in many ways, I have had to come to the conclusion that the ministry is often just as ignorant as the laity on the principles that God would have us follow and some of the history in the development of our church in some of these areas. Tonight I'm going to look at one of the epochs in our church. You know, if you were asked to sit down and say, what are some of the epoch decisions that were made in the Seventh-day Adventist church, I suppose we'd all get a slightly different list. Some might even find it difficult to put anything down, I don't know. But of course 1844 was an epoch period, wasn't it? It was a decision time, and a time when momentous responses had to be made to that disappointment, and only a few made the right decision. I don't know where else to put the epochs. Maybe 1863 with the formation of the General Conference. That certainly was an epoch decision, to go ahead and organize a General Conference. I believe the decision of 1872 to send out a missionary beyond the waters of the United States certainly was an epoch decision that began a work that has expanded around the circle of this globe. I don't think any of us would doubt that 1888 was an epoch in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Opportunities, decision-making times. You know, sometimes when those times come, we don't realize the far-reaching influence of them. We don't realize what will be the broader, more expansive outcome of them. And I'm convinced that the 90-plus delegates there in Minneapolis in 1888 did not understand the extraordinary situation that was occurring. I really believe that they probably just noted it within the context of the local situation that they were encountering, never realizing that the decisions that they would make would have such a vast result in terms of this world's history. Do you realize if our brethren and sisters back there in 1888, had made the decision that God wanted them to make, brethren and sisters, there never would have been a First World War, let alone all the terrible wars we've had since. I want you to keep that in mind. There would not have been a First World War. By the way, none of us would ever have been born. You know, I said that down in Southern Virginia once, and one man became almost angry. He said that would have meant that I'd never made it to the kingdom. Well, I'm thankful for that privilege too, by the way, of the opportunity of being ready for the kingdom, aren't you? And by the grace of God, each one of us has that opportunity, and let's not pass it up. But there is soon to be a generation that will never be born. It has to stop somewhere, doesn't it? And I've got to be honest with you, I hope that's very soon, and I believe it will be very, very soon. Not because I want to keep some future generation out of the kingdom of God, but we could go on like this for billions of years, and it wouldn't end the cycle of sin and of suffering and of misery and torture and all the other horrible things that take place in this sin-cursed earth. The epoch that I'm going to talk about, the epoch decision time I'm going to talk about here tonight, is the epoch time of 1901 and 1903. I believe that we cannot look at the role of church organization and the responsibility of laity unless we look at this period of time. Now, some of you might say to me, well, that's only dealing with the upper echelon of the organization of the church. I want to tell you, brothers and sisters, what happened there has made a profound impact upon what's happening in every local church in the Seventh-day Adventist denomination today. Again, I don't think they recognized it. But the philosophy, their response to divine counsel, the reasoning from cause to effect and from human assumptions and premises that took place then are of a great impact upon us today. I want us to look at a passage of Scripture over in Deuteronomy, beautiful passage of Scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 10. This, by the way, this passage is linked with the everlasting gospel, because you remember the first statement in the everlasting gospel of Revelation 14 verse 7 is what? What is the first two words? Fear God are the first two words. Now notice it here in Deuteronomy 10 verses 12 and 13. And now Israel, and by the way, God is still speaking to us today as his Israel, am I right? Do you believe that? So let us take this for modern Israel, for you and for me today. But now Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee? But to fear the Lord thy God. Yeah, there it is. To fear the Lord. That's the first angel's message, isn't it? Or part of it. Part of the everlasting gospel. To fear the Lord thy God. To walk in all his ways. It's telling us now what it means to fear God. To love him. And to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul. Not just most of it, but all of it. To keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes which I command thee this day. Now, why does he command us to do it? The next words tell us why. Why? Isn't that wonderful? Every command of God, every counsel that God has given is to be followed. You know, just this week I was talking to a man, and he said there's a whole difference between the commands of God and the counsels of God. We must follow the commands, but it's not so essential to follow the counsels. So I turned to him and I said, well, I want to take you to the Laodicean message, and it says, I counsel thee to buy of me gold. Is that an option for you, brothers and sisters? I want to tell you, every counsel of God is a command of God, because God has given it to us for our good. So here it is. And so this is what I want us to look at as laity. It's all right to say, well, the brethren up there in the general conference way back 90 years or so ago, made wrong decisions. They did. No question about it. The men way back in 1888, over 100 years ago, they failed to accept the message of Christ, our righteousness. And when we say they, there were some that accepted it. There's some that wanted to follow God's way. There always are. But I'm talking about the majority. So, in 1901, let us put the background just a little together. You remember that Sister White had, in 1891, gone to Australia. She did not return until September of 1900. She'd been almost 9.5 years down in Australia, a very significant period of her life. Some have always felt that she was urged down there because of her great stand on righteousness by faith and the controversy surrounding it and the lack of acceptance. But I'm not going to go into that tonight because it's not apropos to what we're dealing with here. But for over a decade, she had not attended a general conference session. She'd been down in Australia. She had returned September of 1900, and now she was living in California. And she, for the first time, for over a decade, made the long, arduous train trip across to Battle Creek for the 1901 General Conference session. And she took little time as she stood before those delegates, maybe just over 100 plus delegates, to let them know what God's agenda was. Not their agenda. I'm talking about what God's agenda was for that 1901 General Conference session. Remember this, you might go to a board meeting or a business meeting with an agenda. But sometimes God will raise another agenda. Not that the issues that she was going to talk about were not on the mind of many of the brethren. It wasn't something that was completely ignored in the agenda. I don't want to give you that, but Ellen White made it a central focus of that General Conference. And in the General Conference Bulletin of 1901, page 25, this is what she said. What we want now is a reorganization. We want to begin at the foundation and to build upon a different principle. Now, you remember that God had established the General Conference in 1863. We're now 38 years beyond that, almost 4 decades. I don't think that any of us can understand that well the vast changes in the church of 1863 as the church in 1901. The membership had more than multiplied 10 times, probably 12 or 13 times by that time, from what had been in 1863. Instead of the Adventist church being confined virtually to the northeastern part and the near midwestern part of the United States, it now had scattered all over the United States, and it had scattered to every continent. It was now truly a worldwide church. And so the organization that God had given in the small was no longer relevant to this vastly and rapidly expanding church. But certain of the principles of 1863 were still being applied now to try and embrace the people all over the world. During the session, she soon came to the major pointed issue. Here's this General Conference Bulletin. Well, I'll just say, we're talking about 1901. I don't have to tell you it's 1901. You'll know it'll be always 1901. And page 68 now, she said, I want to say that from the light given me by God. She's not saying what my opinion is. It's not her ideas. She says, from the light given me by God. Every delegate should have had both ears wide open with that introduction. Ellen White was very careful to tell them when she had word from the Lord. Brothers and sisters, when we read in the Bible, the Spirit of prophecy, the word of the Lord, we better have our ears open too. And not only our ears open, but our words and actions ready to follow. There should have been years ago organisations such as we are now proposed. We're very late. We're delayed in doing what we should have done. I suppose she would go back and say, look, once we start to become a worldwide organisation, we should have been doing something like this. When we first met in conference, it was thought that the General Conference should extend over the whole world. But this is not in God's order. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? Have we gone too far from there to look at it again? Or should we be looking at that, brethren and sisters? You hear it again? This is not in God's order. To have a general conference that has its expanse over the whole world. Now, we have to note the pattern of worldly organizations. In worldly organizations, what we do is follow usually a pretty strong hierarchical type of organization. We get a powerhouse at the top, maybe one man, one board of directors, a board of trustees, or whatever they're called, and it's their duty to take hold of it, and as that organization may start small but expands across the nation, and then it starts to expand into markets overseas, and suddenly it becomes a worldwide organization. There's still that mastermind at the top, wherever the central authority is, whether it be in this country or whatever country is responsible. But you know, that's man's way. There is a way that God has, and there is a way that man has. And Jesus made that as clear as crystal. And I want us to see it from the Bible here in Matthew chapter 20. I tell you, brothers and sisters, I wish everyone that will be here for the whole series were here tonight. I always recognize on a Friday night we don't get everyone that we're going to have later. And that's always disappointing, because I cannot but lay the strongest foundation on the opening night. It's important, and what I say from herein is important as we look at, take it back to here. Now, let me have a look at Matthew chapter 20. The experience, perhaps we can just quickly look at it. Excuse me. In Matthew chapter 20, we find a very difficult situation, and a very unfortunate one. Starting from verse 20, I won't read it all, but you remember it, that John and James's mother had come to Jesus with her sons. It's interesting, isn't it? She had these sons, and she had them with her. And I think she had them well and truly primed. They talked it over. You'll see that in a moment. And she said to the Lord, I have a simple request for you. When you establish your earthly kingdom, that's what she really meant. She thought it was going to happen. I want you to put one of my boys. Now, she wasn't playing favourites. She didn't say which one. I want you to put one of them on your right hand and the other on you. To sit on your right and to sit on your left hand. What did that mean? She wanted one to be number one after Jesus and the other one number two. In other words, I want you to single out my two sons ahead of all the other disciples. Ambitious mother, you know, we still have those kind of ambitious mothers today, don't we? Or we need to remember, parents, the statement of the servant of the Lord in page 100 of Messages to Young People. Be ambitious for the Master's glory. That will take away all this kind of hunting for pride of position and power and so on. By the way, every committee should remind themselves of that. Every nominating committee should do it. Everyone that thinks that he ought to be the kingpin in any organization ought to realize that our ambitions should be for the glory of God, for the furtherance of his work. Well, Jesus turned to these men and said, look, can you do what? What's he say there? Well, let's look at it. Perhaps we can read it if you're not familiar with it. Verse 22, are ye able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of? and to be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? They say unto him, we are able. Oh, I tell you, what words. What frightening words. We're able. Listen, they were in it to their, right up to the top of their heads, weren't they? They wanted this power. They wanted this authority. Both of them failed miserably when the test came, just like Peter did. We concentrate on Peter's failure, but they failed too, didn't they? James and John didn't measure up when Christ was taken captive. But anyway, that's not what I'm wanting to concentrate on here. Verse 24, it says, and when the 10 heard it, when those other 10 apostles heard about it, I don't know how they heard. Maybe one was passing by and overheard the conversation. The Bible doesn't tell us how they found out, but some way they found out. They weren't amused, were they? You can imagine it. You mean these two fellows got their mother to go to Jesus? You can imagine the kind of reaction that there was. And they were moved with indignation against the two brethren. And now Jesus gives us a basic principle, brothers and sisters, that everything I say from now to the end of this series, I want you, and I might bring you back tomorrow because there'll be some here that are not here tonight, though it's good to see such a goodly crowd here tonight. But in verse 25 it says, but Jesus called them unto him and said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. He said, look, you know how the Gentiles or the pagans operate. The leaders, they exercise authority, they exercise dominion. In other words, here is this hierarchical kind of situation, and they're going to use all the authority that they have. But I want you to notice the words of Jesus. This is essential. Now, brothers and sisters, in the establishment and operation of churches, never forget this. Perhaps before every board meeting, we need to remind ourselves, every business meeting, every nominating committee meeting, or whatever takes place, a school board meeting, or whatever we have. But it shall not be so among you. That's verse 26 of chapter 20. Now, don't forget that, brethren and sisters. The Gentiles do it one way. The pagans do it one way. If you like, the worldlings, we might say today, or the business corporations, they do it this way. Or the governments of the world, they operate this way. But, and always the two words that I look for most in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy are the words but and if. I don't know whether you're like me. When I see the word but, when I see the word if, I know something critical is going to be taken. They're just little words, but they're full and pregnant with meaning. But it shall not be so among you. We can't follow the ways of the world, brothers and sisters. And that has been one of the great tragedies of God's remnant church. We've followed what we think are the successful patterns of the world. Maybe we've gone in our business administration courses and we've done our baccalaureate degree and we've done our master's degree and we've been told how the successful corporations operate and how the governments of the world operate and the organizational patterns. And we believe that then we must, all we do is sort of sprinkle it with holy water and then apply it into the Seventh-day Adventist church. But that's not to be the way. But it shall not be so among you, but whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. No one should seek the office in a church, whether it be an office of presidents of conference or whether it be an elder in the church or whether it be assistant Sabbath school secretary. Not the level that it is. Unless he's willing to serve. Now, this principle I'm going to bring back in every meeting that we have. You might get tired of it before we're through. I hope you won't. But I want to make such an impact upon it that you'll never forget it, brothers and sisters. You'll never forget it. You notice verse 28, even as the Son of Man came not to minister unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. This is the example. What is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, I want you to do what I did. I want you to be so dedicated to ministering to the needs of those in your sphere of influence that if necessary you'd be willing to die for them. That's a different approach from the Gentiles, isn't it? That's a different approach from the world. They'd rather you died for them. The idea is that I sit back here and send you off to war, whether it's a physical war or some economic war, and if you get slaughtered in it, I'm sorry about it, but that's the way it goes. But Jesus, the leader of this world, he didn't send someone else to die. He didn't get a proxy. He didn't get all the young men around Judah and say, now look, you've all got to die. Be willing to die. No, he died himself. This is the ministry of servanthood. Amen. And I want to tell you, every organization built on this is built on the principles of heaven. Now we can put it aside, brothers and sisters, and we can go the old route of choosing someone and someone sort of politicking to get up to be the chief so that he can then exercise power and dominion and domination and dictatorship. Can get all those things, and I'm not suggesting that always happens. You know, some leaders are benevolent dictators. Some of them are truly the kind that we have here. But God is calling for each one of us, no matter what role we are, to realize we're in this world to serve. We're not in this world to rule. Those statements are going to come out with a mighty force from the pen of inspiration before this series is over, and I hope that all of you are going to stay by this series, because the frustration is if people hear part of it and don't see the whole development of it. Now she went on further, the servant of the Lord, and in pages 68 and 69 of the General Conference Bulletin. These, by the way, for those of you who came a little late, this is always, I'm referring to the 1901 General Conference Bulletin. Now this is what she said. Notice it. Conferences must be organized in different localities, and it will be for the health of the different conferences to have it thus. Well, that doesn't sound too strange. Conferences must be organized in different localities. This does not mean that we are to cut ourselves apart from one another and be as separate atoms. Every conference is to touch every other conference and be in harmony with every other conference. God wants us to talk for this, and He wants us to act for this. We are the people of God. We are to be separate from the world. There's that statement again, similar to what Jesus is saying here. We are to stand as representatives of sacred truth. Now, I must be honest that when I first heard the 1888 message, and it became such a meaningful study in my own experience, and later I heard of the problems of 1901, 1903 and the organizational, I thought that was of a minor nature compared with what happened on truth in 1888. But as I've studied deeply into it, they both are riveted on truth. You know, God has a doctrinal truth, and He has a plan of organization which is also truth. It's a plan of heaven. The truth is the truth of heaven, and the plans are the plans of heaven. And what God was trying to do in 1901 was establish an organizational pattern built upon servanthood, not upon rulership, that would filter right down to the very smallest churches that were established all around the world. You see, the influence of what would be done up there, quotes, at the General Conference, was to have an impact all over the world. And the principles will not change. And here was the opportunity for leadership to set the example and then to teach it to the people in the churches so that there would not be any form of dictatorship in our work and in our church situation. I want to take you now to Matthew 23. I want you to see what we're talking about is built on, though I'm going to read a lot of spirit of prophecy, I want you to see that it's built, brothers and sisters, on the Bible, on the principles of Jesus himself. The experience there, chapter 23, the first part of it, it gets into some of the strongest language that there is in the Bible later in this chapter. But the first part we may not be quite as familiar with, although I think some of us will be. He's talking about the scribes, he's talking about the rabbis and how they want to have the highest position, they want to sit in the most prestigious seats in the synagogues and so on. And they want to be recognized by men. But in verse 8 he says, "But be not ye called rabbi." Again he's contrasting it. This time the contrast is not with the Gentiles, it's contrast with the wrong practices in the church. He's talking about the rabbis, he's talking about the scribes and the Pharisees and so on. He says, "But be ye not ye called rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ. And all ye are" what? Now I'm going to come back to that text a number of times here this weekend until that becomes riveted in our minds. All ye are brethren. Now, in any church organization, we're all brethren and sisters. We use the term. It's, we're, as it were, brothers and sisters in the one family. But then suddenly someone wants to get above the brethren and sisters. Now that can happen at any level of the work. I've sensed that each one of us is so inclined to say, what are they doing wrong up there in the General Conference? What are they doing in our union? Or what are they doing in our local conference? Well, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be burdened by that. But the people in those prominent positions, they are on display. And you know full well that in many local churches the same sort of thing is being acted out in the local community. The same kind of thinking, the same kind of response. And dear brethren and sisters, it's no use us saying, what are they doing wrong up there, or what are they doing here? I believe that we've got to get back on this grassroots situation and get right at the grassroots. After all, that's where we can start. Where can a layman start? Where can a nobody, as someone said to me, I'm a nobody, what influence? Well, we start where we can start. Amen. At the local church level. You see, that makes sense to me. So each time I'm putting you through what happened at 1901 was at the upper echelons, as we would think of it, of the work. But I don't want us to just think in that way, because as we move on, we're going to talk about what we can do as laity. And by the way, how this can influence what's happening in the conference. Now, we might think that that's not a wise situation. You might wonder what I've got here. This is part of the manuscript of a book that I've just finished, except there are the corrections that are yet to go in. So that's about where we are. On this, I'm so burdened on it, I've had to write a book on this church organization. And what we cover in this series will only be a segment of it. Last year I gave a 3-part series on this that I'm not going to cover here. And if any of you want it, you can get that 3-part series on church organization from Heartland. They're on video and it's on tape, if you haven't seen it. That's powerful material that I had there. But I'm not going to be repeating that there. There might be a little overlap, but very, very little overlap, because there's so much more material that the Lord has revealed to me as I've been moving in to the study of this very important issue. Now, Ellen White went on further to explain, we want to understand that there are no gods in our conference. There are to be no kings here. She's getting pretty specific now, isn't she? And no kings in any conference that is formed. All ye are brethren. Where's she quoting from? Matthew 23. Just what we've just read. The Lord of Israel will link us all together. In other words, we don't have to have a human king to link us together. We don't have to have a dominant person, whether it be at the general conference level, whether it be at a division level, whether it be at a local conference level, whether it be at a local church level. We don't have to think that we've got to have one man that is responsible, and if it weren't for him, the place would disintegrate. Now, sometimes some of us think like that. I sometimes have been tempted to think that way. What would happen if I weren't president of Heartland? What a ridiculous thought. If that's the case, then Heartland's in a terrible mess, isn't it? And Satan tempts you to think that way. But brethren, all we are one. Brethren. All right. And he said, and the servant of the Lord said that the Lord God of Israel will link us all together. Do you believe it? Do we have that trust that the Lord is the one that will link us together? In fact, he does a much better job than any human being could do. The organization of the new conference is not to separate us, it is to bind us together. The conferences that are formed are to cling mightily to the Lord, so that through them he can reveal his power. Oh, this is marvelous. Remember that God can give wisdom to those who are handling his work. Now, that means we've got to listen to his voice, don't we, and follow in his ways. It is not necessary to send thousands of miles of advice for advice. See, she is getting back to this general conference situation again. She says it is not necessary to send thousands of miles for advice and then have to wait weeks before an answer can be received. Now, we might say today, well, yes, we can understand in Ellen White's day the fastest means of transportation were on the boats that plied the seven seas. And so they'd have to wait a long time. But today, with our fax machines, we can get the answer on the spot. And we might argue that, but I haven't finished the statement. If you think that's the only issue, how long it takes to get an answer, that was an issue there. And truly, it isn't an issue today. We can get that answer within minutes of sending off the fax. Or maybe it'll take a little longer, but it could be that short a time. But listen to the rest of it. Those who are right on the ground are to decide what shall be done. Those who are right there, that God has placed in that position. The Holy Spirit isn't ministering in a different way in one part of the world and from what he is in another part of the world. You know what you have to wrestle with, but those who are thousands of miles away do not know. So it's more than just the issue of how quickly you can get communication. It's those people. You imagine you're ministering over in some mission field. And problems arise there. Do you think it would be a healthy thing to write or fax, even if you were close enough to a fax, or telephone, or cable, or whatever, to the general conference saying, I've got this problem, what should I do? Dear brethren and sisters, that's not what God said should happen. We're to handle these things at the level where they're happening, where we can see it, get a counsel from people that know the same problems. God, another term you're going to hear me say this weekend, God is a decentralist. You know what I mean by that? He's not a centralist. Every time I hear of some kind of consolidation in our work, you know, whether it's conferences or unions or divisions or publishing house or whatever it is, I shiver. because I know that God is a decentralist. And he doesn't want us just to be coming into fewer and fewer situations. Now, the counsel that Ellen White gave there in 1901 were principles that have been laid down in earlier counsel. For example, you'll find this in Testimonies to Ministers, page 342. As a people, we should study God's plan for conducting his work. Wherever he has given directions in regard to any point, we should carefully consider how to regard his expressed will. This work should have special attention. It is not wise to choose one man as president of the General Conference. That's a pretty striking statement, isn't it? It is not wise to choose one man as president of the General Conference. Now, many Adventists have no idea that was a counsel that God gave. This is not man's counsel. This is God's counsel. The work of the General Conference has extended. Now, when she wrote this in the 1890s, this is before the 1901 General Conference session, we were under 70,000 members in the world field. And she said, even then, it is not wise to choose only one man as General Conference President. Well, what do? We choose 1,000 men, or 10 men, or 5 men, or 3, or whatever, and put them together and call them all General Conference Presidents. Well, let's listen. The work of the General Conference has extended, and that's an important principle. You know, when they started with a little confined area, it might have been appropriate, but not any longer. And as we have expanded since the time when Ellen White wrote this, there should be more General Conference Presidents. The work, and some things have been made unnecessarily complicated. A want of discernment has been shown. There should be a division of the field. That meant the world field. Divide it up. Or some other plan should be devised to change the present order of things. So she's saying, look, let's not try and treat the whole world as a whole. Now, there was a kind of a first step to try and follow this counsel. I'm reading this from the Origin and History of Seventh-day Adventists, Volume 3, page 348. Hence, the European field came to be regarded as a self-sufficient continental unit, separate from what was happening in America. While the organization in the land of origin was called the General Conference in America, and there was beside the Australasian Union Conference. In other words, there had been some kind of attempt to give some autonomy in the Australasian field and in the European field, separate from what was taking place at the General Conference. And Ellen White said that the divisions of those geographical areas received the approbation of God. There had been other attempts that had been made in this situation. But the 1901 reorganizational plan of the General Conference was built strongly on a spiritual base. You'll see why in a moment, or how in a moment. The organization would allow the message of Christ, our righteousness, to come into the lives of leaders and laity alike. Now, let me put the linkage here between 1888 and 1901. Ellen White had seen that the kind of centralized authority that had developed in the General Conference was actually stifling the spread of the message of Christ, our righteousness. The two things are not separate. And she had seen how one man could be considered so critical. Remember when George Butler was not able to get to the 1888 General Conference? To the best of my knowledge, the only time a General Conference president, a reigning General Conference president, if I use that term, but it was almost a true term, as if it was too sick to attend the General Conference session. And so and you remember how men such as Elder Kilgore, the president of the Ahia Conference, stood up and said, we don't think that it's fair to allow Elder Wagner to continue this series when the General Conference president isn't here. That was an interesting statement. And you remember at that time Ellen White went to the podium and said, "Brethren, I don't think that we should change our program because one man isn't here." Now that was almost sounded like a put down of the General Conference president. You know, I don't think that I would feel very comfortable of walking up the front at a General Conference session, and that's what it was. And for some reason Elder Falkenberg was too ill to be there if that had happened. And the General Conference president is away, and someone stands up and says, "Look, I don't think we should take this matter up until the General Conference president is well enough to participate and give his input." I don't think I would have had the courage to walk up the front and say, "Brethren, I think we should continue with this item. We shouldn't just hold it back because one man isn't here." It sounds like a terrible put down of the General Conference president. But when you believe, as Ellen White did, that all we are brethren, and Christ did, then why should we decide, even I think in my own sphere as president of Heartland, that the committee can't make a decision because I happen to be overseas or away or something like that? Listen, that cannot work. That kind of approach is terribly unwise. If you're not there, things stop. I was talking some years ago to the president of another self-supporting institution, and he was complaining to me that every time he was away, the institution ground to a halt. That was a pretty serious complaint, wasn't it? Now, this was quite a well-known institution. And quite an effective institution too. But he said, I find that unless I send out those snowflakes, nothing seems to happen. What he meant with the little notes, do this, do that, do something else. So I turned to him and I said, the problem is they've got used to your snowflakes, and when there are no snowflakes, they don't know what to do. That's centralized government. I hope the place doesn't collapse if I'm away for a week or a month or whatever. If it does, something's wrong with me, or something's wrong with the people that are working with me. The Holy Spirit is speaking to the minds of every sincere person, no matter what their role and responsibility is. I'm not saying that the Lord doesn't place heavier burdens on some than on others. That's true. I'm not wanting to give a false understanding of that. Some people have lighter burdens, or what appear to be lighter. They might be just as heavy for them, and the Lord places heavier on others. But on the other hand, we must not think that we are the kings. We are the ones that make the final decision. Or, as I found in one particular experience that I had in the work, denominational work, not in this country, that decisions were made and the chief would come back, the president, I won't say what level, but it was a good level, high level, and he would come back and he'd look over what had been decided, and if he didn't like something that had been decided, you can rest assured that was on the agenda next time, and he was going to make sure it was changed. Now, to me, there's no point in having a committee. I mean, veto power, if you've got veto power, what's the point of the committee? Why not just go ahead and make the decision and save the time of wasting the time? And here in this, this situation, in this reorganizational plan, it was built upon the relationship here of the 1888 message, and a decentralized way, so that God could move more freely amongst the people, and so Satan couldn't throttle it by by deceiving one or two people. In any way, why should any one man or even a small group of men have the awesome responsibility of the weight of the whole work upon their shoulders? That's not fair to them. Now, in 1897, there had been an attempt to do a bit of decentralisation at the General Conference. Ellen White had been counselling back from Australia. And so for the first time, they divided up three aspects of the work. There was the President of the General Conference. Then there was the President of the General Conference Association. That was a legal organisations of the General Conference. And then there was the President of the Mission Board. Three different people. Now, in effect, what that had done, for example, was to give a new person responsibility on all the overseas work, because the Mission Board had been set up at that time to send out the missionaries and to get the fields out there. And the General Conference President had no direct leadership in that. So there was some form of decentralisation that had already come. And we're going to see what happened to all that in 1903. Not today, but tonight, but we will see it tomorrow morning. 1903, that was all reversed. It lasted for a period of about 6 years, where they'd separated it out. In 1901, the committee, they decided to choose a committee to run the General Conference in America. And the committee consisted of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, Elder Alonzo T. Jones, and Elder A.G. Daniels. They were the inner core of the committee. Then they had, of course, a General Conference committee, and it was up to the committee each year to choose a chairman. Well, they chose Elder A.G. Daniels as the chairman. But recently I was reading some of the correspondence of A.G. Daniels about this. This is 1901. By the way, Daniels was 42 at the time. He wasn't all that old. He was 42 years of age when he became General Conference President. He'd been in charge of the Australasian field before that. And by the way, had done a very credible job and ministry over there. Now, the whole idea was to make sure that not one person was in charge of everything. But in the letters that he wrote and some of the comments he made a little later, he said, well, it was true that people still kept calling me the president. See, it's not only the problem of the leader, it's the problem what the others do. Still kept calling me president. And he said it was true that a little later I got stationery printed and I put president of the General Conference. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of that, I'm just saying that's what happened. And he said it was true that most people seemed to accept it very well, but there were a few that weren't too favourable to what they saw. Now, all that had happened between 1901 and 1903, and the thought of choosing or re-electing a chairman seemed to vanish. They were, and some said, and this was a thing, hey, they've taken the role out of the hands of the General Conference session. Now they've put in a small committee to choose who's going to be the leader. But it would seem that at every General Conference session they would establish who the leadership group was, and then they're going to leave it to them with the idea that if it was thought necessary or advantageous in term between sessions, someone else could be chosen. Didn't have to keep the same man, you see, or the same leader. Now, in those, you remember when the General Conference first was formed, how often did we have a General Conference session? How long between each session after 1863? 3 years? 2 years? Any other suggestions? None of us know. It's interesting, isn't it? They were held every year. They were annual. Now, however, before the turn of the century, they had become biennial, every 2 years. And so you see 93, 95, 97, 99, 01, 03, etc. Then they did a major leap to quadrennial. There was no triennial period for the General Conference session. And of course, most of us, if we've been in the church most of our lives, that's how we knew the General Conference sessions until 1970. They were quadrennial sessions. The 1970 session was a quadrennial session. And in 1970, it was decided for just once to go for a quinquennium, 5 years. Well, you didn't have to be too much of a prophet to say that was going to become established. So now there are 5 years in between. Now, the cost of a General Conference session is an extraordinarily high cost situation. 7 million or so involved. Maybe a lot more if we found out all the hidden costs and so on. And that is a big concern for everyone, and understandably. But now I heard at an annual council a suggestion of it going to 7 years. No, nothing official. But listen, if we get that long in between, the General Conference has to operate, doesn't it? It's going to be a difficult situation. Well, you know, I'm going to leave it there because I want to take it up tomorrow morning. What time is it tomorrow morning? 9:30? 9 o'clock? What is it? 9:30. If there are folk that you have noticed that are not here that should be here tomorrow, just give them a call tonight or first thing in the morning. Make sure that they are aware of the meetings. But I want us here to realize that we're talking about what happened at the General Conference level, and too many laity and so on leave the issue and the principle at the General Conference. And I'm starting there, but I'm going to move into what it means for you in a local church congregation, where you do have a role and a responsibility to follow God's leading all the way. But remember this, all of us here are brethren. No matter what roles we're playing, we're brethren. We are not superhumans like the rest. But for the grace of God, we'd be lost for eternity. But for the power of Christ, we'd have no wisdom. And that God is trying to bring us each together. And so I'm going to ask, if we possibly can, or wherever we can, to kneel. And we're going to pray that God will give us a wisdom to follow His divine plan wherever it leads. Father in heaven, we're not here to concentrate upon the errors of the past, but to learn from it. And Lord, we know that we can be just as guilty as anyone in high office of wittingly or unwittingly failing to follow the precious guidelines that you have given to us. And yet we know that they're all for our good and for the harmony and unity of thy people. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.